Welcome to the Tech Cast, where we bring you all things science, engineering, technology, and innovation. Today we are joined by Jake Kennington, a licensed structural engineer who spent over a decade designing $100 million buildings. But after reaching a peak in his career, he realized his own life felt misaligned. He made a pivotal shift from building structures to helping high achieving professionals design fulfilling lives through his company, Actively Human. In this episode, we'll explore how he applies a systematic approach to personal development, helping engineers and technical professionals bridge the gap between external success and internal fulfillment. So, Jake, it's great to have you on the show today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I appreciate you inviting me on, Ezekiel, and I love what you're doing with the show. And hopefully, your audience gets something out of today. Excited to be here.
All right, thank you very much. So let's dive in. Your journey from, designing $100 million buildings as a structural engineer to helping people design their lives is fascinating. So, what was a specific structural flaw you identified in your own life that made you realize you needed to change your entire blueprint for success? Can you just walk us through that journey for you?
For sure, I'd love to. And I'll preface it with this: I am a licensed structural engineer, like you said in that introduction. I love engineers. I love being an engineer. I love my roots in school and college and my work experience. And so I love working as a coach with people that are engineers and in the STEM field. But what happened was I started that journey of becoming an engineer back in college before I was even married. So this was 2009, 2010 when I fell in love with civil engineering and specifically structural engineering. Then I went to school, I graduated, I got my work experience. I worked under some other licensed engineers, took my tests, and became licensed myself. And it was a great journey, but somewhere along that path, life changed. Like I said, I got married. I have four wonderful children now, ages 2 to 11. And as life changes, oftentimes our priorities change. So my priorities changed as well, from the person that I was 15 years ago to the person that I am now. There's still a lot of similarities, but there's some major differences in what I prioritize and what's important to me. And so just along that path, eventually I kind of realized that the career that I had built, which once I was super proud of, all of a sudden wasn't really in alignment with the life that I wanted to live and the lifestyle that I wanted to have. And so I started to make some changes along that path. Unfortunately, over the years, I gained a lot of weight. I wasn't very physically fit, for lack of a better word. My relationships with my wife and kids were kind of strained because I wasn't giving them the time and attention that they needed. I worked a lot, right? That's pretty common of most people like myself, that we put in long weeks and long hours. And so all of a sudden, I found my life kind of headed in one direction, the life that I had built, but I was kind of wanting something else. And so I made those changes. I did a lot of deep personal work and figured out how to redefine success on my own terms, and rebuilt my habits, restored my relationships, and worked to realign my life around what was important to me and what mattered. And ironically, that journey led me to start a company called Actively Human. And what I do there with that company is I help other people do the same thing.
That sounds like a really interesting journey. So, Jake, for the engineers and systemic thinkers listening, how do you apply engineering principles to the process of personal development and life design today?
Well, what a great question. If you talk to any engineer and ask them, and I would imagine this would go for anybody in the STEM field or any technical profession, you say, why do you do what you do professionally? And almost always they'll give you at least a version of this answer. They'll say, I like problem solving. I like to solve problems. Engineers, I'll speak for them because I am one. We think everything is figure outable, right? We think
Mm,
everything can be solved, every problem can be figured out. My wife, ironically, she's kind of funny, and maybe this is a female versus male difference, but oftentimes she doesn't want to figure out the problem. She just wants to talk to me and have somebody to listen. But I definitely am a problem solver, and I think what we can do is use those same skills, those same problem solving skills, and the belief that everything is figure outable, and not only apply them in a technical sphere like we do in our profession with, for me, it's designing buildings, but take that same mentality of I can figure this out and try to build a life that I find satisfying and fulfilling. And so what I try to do is take that same mentality or that same thought process and apply it to a much more human and non-technical perspective, which is building the life that you want.
Fantastic. So you talk about the alignment gap. So what are the key metrics or signals a high achieving professional can look for to diagnose that there's a misalignment between their career and their personal values?
Yeah, it's kind of tricky because a lot of it's internal. So that's a great question, meaning that your coworker probably wouldn't know that about you if you're feeling like you're misaligned or there's this gap. They might be like, "Yeah, Ezekiel's showing up to work and he's killing it and he's doing everything right." Meanwhile, internally inside, you're kind of like, "Man, I don't know if I like this career anymore, this job." So it's hard to see from the outside. People often describe it, self-describe, as they are looking for more or they're looking for something different. They often don't have the words for what that is exactly, but they've kind of been down the road of 5, 10, 15 years in their career, and they've gotten to the top of that mountain and they go, "Man, it's been great. The journey has been great, but this isn't the view that I thought it would be, and I don't find it as satisfying." So internally, there's kind of this tension or this frustration. I think the way that that shows up is people start looking for another job. They start having conversations with either their spouse or a close friend about, is this it? Like, is this what I signed up for? Am I going to do this for the next 30 years? And so if you're having these thoughts and asking these questions, that's probably a good assessment that there's some sort of misalignment, that the life you're living isn't the life that you want to live and that you can do something about that. So that's how I would answer that question. Is it's much more internal, but it can be pretty obvious at times.
Fantastic response there, Jake. So I'm a bit curious about your reDAC framework. So can you walk us through, the what the acronym stands for and how it functions as a systematic process for realignment?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. The reDAC framework, you nailed it on the head. It's an acronym. It stands for Redefine, Realign, and Reconnect. And I'll explain the framework just by paralleling kind of my journey. Redefine means redefine success. And so for me, I think we're all guilty of this. We kind of follow the leader quite a bit. We follow the guy a couple years ahead in our career. We follow our boss, we follow our supervisor, we do whatever they did because on paper it looks like they're successful and therefore I'm going to follow them. There's nothing wrong with that if the life that they have is the life that you want. But the trick there is that, at least in a professional setting, like when you show up at work, most of the time we don't know what somebody's life is outside of the four walls of the office. We can see their career and we can see their external success, and we often go, "Oh, I want that." But more often than not, some of those people, although they're externally successful, inside they're not as happy as you would think. And they're having some of their own internal struggles. And so when I talk about redefining success, it means, well, what does success mean for you? What would a life well lived look like for you inside the workplace and also at home? And so I work with my clients on redefining what success means for them. That's where we start. And then we move into realignment. So we have this theory or this plan of what does success mean, and then we go take action and we start to move their calendar around and we start to try to implement those core values or those core beliefs that they have around what is success, and actually take action on those things. And then the last third element is reconnect of the reDAC framework. Reconnect is reconnecting with yourself, your spouse, if you have one, your kids, your loved ones, your friends. Almost always when people go down this path of an alignment gap and where they start to feel a little bit miserable or stuck or not happy in their life, it's because they're lacking deep human connection with the people they care about most. And so that's the brief framework. We go through redefine success, realign with what matters most, and reconnect with the people that you love in your life. And it's simple and it's intentionally simple. I think the when you narrow it down to three things and keep it simple, that can have profound impact on people's lives.
All right, Jake. So, can you share like a story of a client, perhaps another technical professional who was successful all by external measures but felt completely stuck? So, what was the first small design change you had them make that started to shift everything for them?
Yeah. There's so many examples I could share. I'll share one, and before I do, I want to say this: when I talk with my clients about redefining success, the reason that's so important is because these people are at a point where they want to make a change in their lives for the better.
Hmm.
They want to live a life that they're happy to live, and that they're excited every day to go to work and to come home and spend time with their family, but they know they need to make a change. And there's a book written by a man named James Clear. It's a really popular book. It's called Atomic Habits. Millions and millions of people have bought this book. They've read it. They've probably heard of it. Your listeners have probably heard of it. And in that book, he talks about habits, but ironically, he also mentions something called identity. And he says that true behavior change is identity change. And what he means by that is that real change doesn't start with what we do, it actually starts with who we believe we are. So oftentimes, a good example is we want to lose weight, right? We
Hmm.
start going to the gym, especially at the beginning of the year, and we go, "Oh, I want to lose weight, and I'm overweight, and I went through this myself." And we go to the gym, and that change doesn't stick. That habit doesn't stick. It doesn't last very long. We go for a few weeks, and then we stop going. And the reason is we started with the action of going to the gym. That was the goal, and we wanted to lose weight. But like James Clear says in his book, we haven't really changed our identity and who we are. Oftentimes we're chasing new outcomes with an old identity. And so what in this example, what helps us stick with new and better habits and new and better actions is the identity that we adopt, not necessarily the actions that we take. And the reason I prefaced the answer to your question with that is because I worked with a client. I'll just call him John, just for privacy reasons. But John and I worked together for 16 weeks. He is an engineering firm owner. He owns a firm here in my area in Utah, and he's got about 20 employees. And again, on the outside, it looks like he's killing it. His business is thriving. He started his business just a few years ago, and now he has 20 employees. They have tons of work. They're making a ton of profit. From the outside, they're doing really, really well. But on the inside, John was exhausted. He was working 70+ hour weeks for 3, almost 4 years straight, 7 days a week, work, work, work. And he knew that he didn't want to do that because he also has a wife and 5 kids. And similar to my story, his health declined. He was overweight. He wasn't taking care of himself physically, mentally, spiritually. But he also wasn't spending time with the people that he cared the most about, his wife and kids. So he contacted me. We worked together, and this is what he said the first time that we talked. He said that he knew that he had 1 year left. He had about 12 months of runway left before he was going to be completely burned out and have to start over, meaning sell the company, get another job, do something else. And so we worked together on this exact concept of not necessarily what he was going to do, because he knew what he needed to do. He knew he needed to delegate to his employees and stop doing all the work. He knew that he needed to trust them and empower them and work through them. But he wasn't doing that. He was approaching his business as the guy that had to do all the work, right?
Hmm.
He was still the individual contributor that he had been for the previous decade in his other career, right? He was the one grinding out the work, doing the calculations, putting everything together. And he has this team that he's not utilizing. They're doing their work too, but he's double checking everything. He's micromanaging. He has to have the final say on every little thing. And he had yet moved to the identity of CEO and president of the company. He wasn't acting like a CEO. He was acting like one of his employees, right? And so we talked about that and we worked through it. And he adopted this new identity of, okay, I'm going to be the president and I'm going to be the CEO. And what would that person do in my situation? They wouldn't actually do the work. They would work through other people. They would be a leader. They would be in charge of the work, but not necessarily doing the work. And so that's an identity that he adopted. And I'm happy to say that, while we worked together, the first step for him was to take one day off of work. He hadn't taken a day off in 3 or 4 years. So he took one day off and he let his employees take care of any of the fires that came up that day and deal with the clients and get the work done. And he came back and he realized that the business was still there and it hadn't burned down and he was okay. And then he took 2 days off, 2 consecutive days off. And he realized that, you know what? He's got a pretty good team. And there's some work on the front end that he has to do to be able to take time off, but he did it. And he came back and the business was okay. And his last goal right before we finished working together was to take a whole week off and to go spend time with his wife and his kids, go on vacation, whatever he wanted to do. Do the activities that would fill him up and give him the energy so that when he came back the following week, that he would be an even better boss, an even better husband, and an even better father. And so again, it was this idea of, he knows what he needs to do. He told me when we first met, I need to delegate and I need to trust my employees. He knew what he needed to do, but he couldn't do it long term because he hadn't yet adopted a new identity of president and CEO of the company. So we worked through that and it was a success and he's making wonderful strides and, it's a battle. He's still working on it. And I'm always happy to chat with him and help him, but he's been a wonderful inspiration for me as well to keep at it, figure out what's most important, figure out that new identity and just keep going.
Fantastic. That's a really interesting story. Thank you very much for sharing. So, moving forward, for someone who feels they don't have the time or mental bandwidth to step back and redesign their life, what is the absolute minimum viable experiment that they can run to start gathering data about what truly fulfills them?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I was at a conference just a little while ago, a couple weeks ago, and I presented some information about, building the life that you want. And the presentation was called Engineer Yourself First.
Mm,
And I listed all these things out that they could do, build a morning routine, work on yourself, journaling, all these different things. And at the end of the conference, a younger guy raised his hand that we did a Q&A at the end. And he raised his hand and I said, yeah, what's your question? And he said, I have a 3-month-old daughter at home and me and my wife are just trying to survive. And you just gave us a whole list of things to do. And he said, how am I supposed to do all that? It ultimately was
mm,
his question. He said, what do I do? He said, I have a 3-month-old at home. What do I do? But reading between the lines, he's saying, man, you just listed off a ton of stuff. And I don't think I can do that because I don't have the bandwidth. My cup is already full. What do I do? And I told him this, and I'll share it with your listeners as well. Perhaps your cup is full. Perhaps you have a lot going on with your family and your kids or your career or whatever it may be, health issues. I don't know. Everything that we're talking about today, Ezekiel, I think people have to take the ideas and the concepts and adapt them to their phase of life. Meaning that, and that's why I like your question. You said, like, what's the minimum viable step that they could take to start making progress in their life and
yeah,
to build the life that they want?
yeah.
And so I think the answer is take the concepts and ask yourself, how does this apply to me? And what I would do for your listeners for today, this is exactly what I would do. I go on a walk every morning. I go out and I walk for 30 minutes. I pray during that time. I reflect on my day ahead and my day before. I don't put my headphones in. I don't listen to podcasts or music or anything like that. I just spend time outside and I kind of let my thoughts wander a little bit. and it just helps me prepare for the day. And oftentimes I ask myself a question or something to think about or ponder while I'm on this walk. And what I would invite your listeners to do is if they feel like they're in a point where their cup is full and that they're not in love with the life that they have, but they don't know what the next step is, go on a 30-minute walk, go outside, walk for 30 minutes and ask yourself this one question. Ask yourself, what does success look like for me in this phase of life? And
Mm.
just think about that. It's a very open ended question on purpose, but what does success mean for me? That could be professionally, that could be personally, that can be in your relationships with your loved ones, whatever it may be. And the reason that question is so profound is because once we've identified what's important to us, we can live a life that lines up or is in alignment with that, with that definition of success.
Awesome. So, Jake, you are also a children's book author. So, how does that, creative process of writing for children complement the analytical process of, coaching adults? What have you learned about, what have you learned from it about curiosity and purpose?
Yeah, so I wrote a children's book for my oldest son. He's 11. I wrote it several years ago and then it just kind of sat on the shelf. It was kind of a family project. 2 years ago, I decided to revitalize that project, hire a better illustrator, and really make it something that could like sit on the shelf at a bookstore. We'd be proud of to share with other people. And so we did that. We self-published. We put it up on Amazon. And the funny thing about that story is I mentioned I have 4 kids. So my oldest son is like all proud of the book I wrote for him. And my second son is now 8. And he's like, Dad, where's my book? And so I've committed to writing 4 books total. And what's really profound about that experience, even though it's a children's book, the reason I wrote those was to leave some important life lessons with my kids and my posterity. And so there's always kind of a moral to the story in the book and something that I want my kids to learn. And so that was the reason behind it. But what I've learned is that by sharing that with other people, coworkers, friends, family members, and now strangers online, the other day somebody bought a book and they lived 800 miles from me.
Mm.
And they reached out after the fact and they said, man, this book is phenomenal. They sent me a picture of, reading it with their nephew. And I've built some real deep personal connections with other real humans just by simply writing a children's book. And so what I love about that is it doesn't necessarily have any tie-in to engineering. There's no there's no connection there other than I'm an engineer and I wrote a children's book. But even the company that I worked for at the time when I published that book, they did a lot of work with higher education and with elementary schools, K through 12 here in the United States. And we were doing an event where we were hosting an event and we had a bunch of school districts come because we were working on some of their projects. We were designing some of their buildings for the schools. And my company invited me to go speak at that event, not as an engineer, not as a technical expert, but as a children's book author. And they said, we want to buy a bunch of books from you and we want to give them to the people at the event. And we'd love to have you speak for a few minutes. And what I loved about that experience was it goes to show that we are not one dimensional. And that even if we're an expert in a technical field like structural engineering or anything else, that there's more to us as far as our identity goes than just our profession. And I love that about that experience. I didn't expect that. That's not why I wrote the book. But when you dive into your creative side, you never know the opportunities that are going to come up, but they're always very fulfilling.
Fantastic. So, what gives you the most hope about people's ability to change and redesign their lives even after, years on a certain path?
Yeah, oh man, you're full of all the good questions today, Ezekiel. That's fantastic as well. I'll share this. I was reflecting on just my life in general, reading through some of my journals and kind of looking at the path that my career's been on and my family and just very introspective, thinking about things. And I started to make a list of some of the experiences that I've been through. One of those lists is this. I came up with this. I turned 40 in February. I don't feel like I'm 40 yet, and I'm not. So I'm gonna say I'm 39. But in those 40 40 years or so, I've lived in 25 different homes or apartments. I've lived in 14 different cities, 2 different countries. I've had over 40 roommates, and that doesn't include my wife and my kids. And I've had 22 different jobs. And the reason I say that is because I've been around a lot of different people in a lot of different settings, speaking different languages in different careers, in different cities, in different places around the world. And there's two things that I've learned about people. And I think this answers your question. What gives me the most hope are these two things. Is I've learned that people want to be engaged in the work that they do. We're not lazy by nature. We like a challenge. We want to do something that's meaningful and fulfilling, and we want to rise to the occasion.
Mm.
And then the number two, the other thing I've learned is that people need to be connected to other people. They thrive when they have strong, deep relationships with the people that they love. Again, whether that's family members or friends or coworkers or neighbors or people that they go to church with. And unfortunately, the life that we live, it's very easy to have very superficial or not very deep relationships. And so it takes a lot of work, but when we work at it and we spend time with those individuals that we care about the most and cultivate those deep relationships and that connection, we're always happier. And so that gives me the most hope is knowing that people want to be all in and committed and they're up for a challenge and they want to work hard. And also that, there's other humans out there that we can connect with and can help us on our journey.
Fantastic. Part of the theme of this podcast is centered around innovation, and for that reason, I like to reserve one question on innovation for all the guests I have a conversation with. So tell us, in your work, which is about applying design and engineering principles to the human experience, so what does the word innovation truly mean to you?
That's a good one. What does innovation mean to me through my lens and the work that I do?
Yeah.
I would have to say that most of what I teach, most of the things that I share in my coaching programs is not innovative in the sense that it's new or flashy or cutting edge. That's what we
Mm,
tend to think of as innovation, right? In
yeah.
fact, most of the stuff, if not all the stuff that I talk about is kind of timeless, but brought to light in a new version. So for example, I talk a lot about journaling. People have journaled, since the beginning of time, right? We have things like the Bible and these old works that have been around thousands of years that people wrote in a journal. So it's not a new concept, but bringing it into context of what that means here and now and how that's applicable to our lives, I think is the innovation that I deal with in my work. So there's things like journaling, there's things like personal development, there's things like physical health. There's all these things that like aren't new concepts, but maybe they're applied in a new way. And to a lot of people, they're things that, although they're old concepts, they've never done themselves. So, in essence, they're kind of innovating on a personal level, right? Going through some of these milestones and some of these things that they've never experienced, and they're doing it for the first time. So, for them, it's an innovation, if that makes sense.
Right. Awesome response there. A fantastic one. So finally, for our listeners who are ready to start their own redesign process, so where can they go to find your resources on it and connect with your work at Actively Human?
Yeah, so my website is really easy. It's activelyhuman.com. And if anything that we've talked about today, Ezekiel, resonates with any of your listeners, I just want to invite them to go a little bit deeper on what we discussed, some of these principles. And I've created a free resource for them. It's something that they can download, sign up real easily. It's called the Own Your Life Playbook. And they can just go to activelyhuman.com/hashtag playbook and they can get that free resource. It asks for their name and their email. I'd love to connect with any of your listeners that, again, want to go deeper and learn little bit more about these principles. And again, that's activelyhuman.com/hashtag playbook.
Fantastic. So it's been a really a really interesting and insightful conversation with you, Jake, and I am totally excited to have you on the show today.
I had a blast. I appreciate your insights, and you had some wonderful questions. So thanks for chatting, and it's been a pleasure to get to know you, man.